I just texted him. Hopefully we'll get the official thing started on. But LIOCO is a winery that I've been featuring now since I was working at Press 626, the wine bar in Norfolk, and I fell in love with their wines because they showed more of that restraint, more of that elegance and finesse that I was looking for California wines. And I really just enjoyed their attitude. If everyone wants to, turn the labels on the back and just check out the back of the labels. They are so intense about the information that they give, from the pH balance to the total level of acidity, to the brix of the grapes at harvest, which is the sugar content of the grapes at harvest. And I love their, you talk about like my wine tags, and I usually give my tasting notes of what it smells like or tastes like. They go above and beyond. So for instance, this indica table red wine, the indica red wine, the Carignan blend, aromary, blueberry compote specifically, not just blueberry, dried rosemary and iron. The flavor, plum skin, granite black raspberry, food pairings, they always go so specific. This is actually pretty normal. Let me see if I can, what are the most interesting? Oh, for the Chardonnay, I love it. Flavor lime leaf. I have never smelled lime leaf before, but now I'm dying to smell the leaf of a lime tree. Star fruit and rock salt. I love it. Food pairing Dungeness crabs. Absolutely. Now I just want that. But then they go basic too, and talk about mac and cheese. So I love their notes. I think information like that is so key when you're trying to learn more about what you're tasting and not just drink the same thing every time. So if you're drinking a new wine, to actually understand a little bit more about what's in your glass is so important. And so I really appreciate that they give that information on there. So their whole ethos is creating really authentic wines that express like what that grape actually tastes like. Authentic also to their terroir, where it's grown. So different elevations are going to make the wine taste differently. And so if all of your wine tastes the exact same, then that gets into the realm of more formulaic wine. And that's like a formula of like, we pick grapes, and then we add cultured yeast, and then we add acid, and we add sugar, and we ferment it till this temperature, and we oak it for this much. And so every vintage and every wine tastes the exact same. There is something to be said for that level of consistency, especially if you're a mass-produced wine. You need to have that level of consistency. People need to know that they can trust the product. I like vintage variation. I like knowing that every vintage, the wine's going to taste a little bit different because they're not adding all of the things to make formulaic wine. So it's not going to all taste the same. And you're going to get those differences and those nuances of each vintage as it expresses the grape differently. So I really appreciate that. California wine definitely has changed a lot. So in the very beginning, and I'm sure Matt will talk about this, the very beginning, in the 60s, when premium wine started to really kick off in California, specifically Napa, they produced very reserved, a little more elegant style, European style wines with just higher levels of acidity, really expressing terroir, a little bit more of that intense minerality to the wine. The oak was, a little bit more reserved side. And then in the mid 80s, the style totally changed, specifically because of Robert Parker. He's a famous wine raider. He was a lawyer, traveled the world with a very, very large wallet and expense account, and was able to taste wines from all over the world and became a wine critic. And that's what he started him. So Robert Parker, and he really valued and sought after big, powerful, robust wines with super extracted fruit, higher levels of alcohol content, newer oak flavorings to it, very, very intense, full-bodied, robust wines. And as the consumers started to buy wine because it was highly rated by Robert Parker, then the winemakers are now like, well, no one's buying our wine because it's not rated by Parker, and Parker won't rate our wines because it doesn't taste like this. So economics 101, like supply and demand. So we need to start making wines a little bit more in this style so that we can, stay relevant and keep selling our wine. And I think there's definitely, there's a time and a place for those wines for sure. The longer I go in my wine career, and I know I'm young, but I've now been doing wine classes and wine events for about 12 years now. The longer I taste wine, the more wines I taste every year, I find my palate gravitating more and more towards wines with a little bit softer styles, a little bit more elegance of fruit. And I think it's just because I taste so much wine, I don't want one glass to kind of shock my palate and lay me down. I need something that's going to work with food, that's not going to overpower the food, that's not going to kill my palate. And so I look for these wines like LIOCO's wines, and I've been really happy with their wines. So I'd say in the last 10 years, there's been a little bit more of a shift in dynamic, and a lot of the winemakers are shifting more towards more reserved, elegant styles of California wine, still expressing all of the lovely fruit that California can offer because of it's just sunnier, it's just warmer than it is in France and places of Italy and Spain. So you can get riper fruits than you can in these cooler regions of the more classic regions of France. So you're still expressing California fruit, but not with an intensity of over extraction and a focus on lots of oak kind of covering up the flavors of the wine. But I'd say that has been a very slow trend away. I think that the trend is still very much focused on those like power wines. And so there's a few winemakers that are just like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, like, we're going to focus on selling these wines to restaurants then instead of retail stores to pair with specific foods and to really be food wines. And so it definitely takes like someone to sell these wines to you, because they're not found in local stores, wine stores, or big wine shops at all like that. So you're not going to find these. They're not rated by anyone because they're not submitting them to anyone to get rated. And they're different grapes, right? They don't grow Cabernet, and Cabernet is the grape, right, of California. And so if you're not growing Cabernet, then you've got to kind of find your niche, and LIOCO really did. So they focus on only 3 grapes, Chardonnay, and they've got a few different labels. We're tasting their higher end Chardonnay because I think it's just so beautiful. And if you're like me and you're skeptical about Chardonnay, then hopefully you'll fall in love with this one. They focus on Pinot Noir and different styles of that too. If you've got the Pinot Noir, if you were the lucky ones to get that wine, then we're tasting their Mendocino, kind of their entry tier Pinot Noir, and then Carignan. So only 3 grapes. Carignan, they do some blends with Carignan, but in very small percentages. So the Indica Red has about 7% Valdigue is the name of the grape. And they don't make 100% Valdigue wine. So that's just a grape that they have small portions of that they'll use for blends. And then the last one is 100% Carignan. Old vines, just really, really eclectic vineyards, and really, really just beautiful stuff. So, well, I'm a little bummed that we don't have a winemaker here yet for this Zoom meeting. I haven't heard back from him, so I hope everything's okay. I say, just so y'all aren't waiting any longer, we can go ahead and start tasting through the wines. And if he joins us and jumps on, then that would be great, and we can hear all about it. If not, we're still going to drink some great wines. So if everyone's got their Chardonnay, man, I was not planning on teaching this class, so I don't have as much of the information that I was hoping we would go through about these wines, but we're gonna roll with it. So let's get our noses in here and smell this Chardonnay. So Chardonnay is native to Burgundy, France. France is, hi, Mom and Papa. Those are my parents, y'all. If you have joined them on the chat room for my YouTube classes, then you've seen them as some mom and some pop, but it's great to see everyone's faces for these too, so you get to know everybody a little bit more. So Chardonnay originated in France, in Burgundy, France, the region, very cool climate region, and produced grapes with high levels of acidity. So Chardonnay and Pinot Noir, native to the same area of Burgundy, France, higher levels of acidity, and they are chameleon grapes, both of them. So both of them react very strongly to the environment in which the vines are growing, and both of them react very, very not strongly, but react very sensitively to, sorry, joining a couple more. Both Pinot Noir and Chardonnay react very sensitively to winemaking techniques as well. So they express flaws in winemaking like nobody's business. So let's talk about our kitchen floors. Does anyone have one of those pure white kitchen tile floors that you could like breathe on it the wrong way and it's going to show the dirt on the floor? And it's so frustrating because you have to clean it all of the time and it's never like, it never looks fully clean. That's kind of how sensitive Chardonnay and Pinot Noir are both to the environment in which they're grown and to the style of winemaking that the winemaker is going to apply to it. So when we talk about the idea of terroir, terroir is that French word that's difficult to pronounce and difficult to also to define or translate, because there is no English word for it, but it means sense of place. So it's not just the soil, but it's also the aspect. So is there a slope or not? If there is a slope, which way is it facing? Is it facing south or is it north facing? Maybe east or west? Is it rocky terrain or sandy terrain or sedimentary soils, volcanic soils? Is there a lot of wind nearby? Is there a forest nearby that's protecting? Is there a lot of humidity in the air? How many average hours of sunlight does that vineyard get per day, per year? What about the rainfall? All of these things, from the climate to the soil to the aspect, encompass the word terroir. It's not just soil. So all of these things are affecting Pinot Noir and Chardonnay so dramatically in Burgundy that's why they say Burgundy is the quintessential like lesson of terroir. So if you want to know how terroir affects the flavor of grapes, you can take Pinot Noir, grow it in all of these different vineyards, the exact same clone of Pinot Noir, pick it the same day, make it the exact same way, Chardonnay too, and you're going to have 20 different expressions if there's 20 different vineyards, because that's how dramatically terroir affects all grapes, but specifically Pinot Noir and Chardonnay. So in the very beginning of kind of California colonization, they planted Chardonnay grapes everywhere. So they planted these vines everywhere. Chardonnay, while it's really finicky and it's very sensitive, it grows like wildfire. So it'll express the flavors of where it's grown and how it's made really sensitively, but it grows like wildfire, very like high yield grapevine. So it's going to produce a lot of bunches. So when you're talking about the economics of what you're going to choose to plant, where, how, why, and when, Chardonnay is perfect because you don't have to like do much to it for it to like grow and make a lot of grapes. And so if you're just trying to make wine to drink, then that is perfect. But Chardonnay really does thrive better in cooler climates, like Burgundy, where it's from. And so when they were growing it, planting it everywhere throughout California, it was way too hot for Chardonnay to be made well and elegantly. So the wine tasted like shit. And so to cover up the terrible taste of this wine, also they weren't doing like lots of vineyard management in terms of clipping grapes, or fruit dropping is what we call it, to make sure the flavor is more concentrated. They weren't doing anything really to the vineyards. They were just letting it grow. So that's natural wine, right? And so in order to cover up kind of the mistakes of the vineyards and how that wine was expressed, they were aging the wine in a lot of oak. I'm talking about a lot of oak. And it's newer oak, it's American oak, which wasn't ever really used in the wine world. It was always French oak, Serbian, Hungarian, Slovenian oak cast, but now we're in the United States, so we might as well use American oak, way cheaper than getting stuff shipped in from from France. So using American oak is much coarser grain tannins, so you're going to get a lot more of this intensity of sorry, I got a text, I was making sure it wasn't the winemaker. This intensity of the oak flavors imparted to the wine, and also intensity of these tannins. So the wine isn't good, they're aging it in oak because those intensities of that oak flavor, that American oak flavor, is going to kind of mask the imperfections of the California wine. Also, they would let the wine undergo full malolactic fermentation. Malolactic fermentation happens in all red wines, but only a few white wines, because it happens when the juice itself, after that first fermentation, if it's left on the lees, which is that dead yeast, for a longer period of time at a certain temperature, usually a little bit warmer than white wine typically is fermented at, it will undergo a secondary fermentation process. This process turns malic acid Think Granny Smith apples, that sour green tart acid feeling turns malic acid into a new acid, a compound called lactic acid. Think lactic, lactose, cream, butter. So it turns those Granny Smith tart green apple flavors of the wine into these creamier, buttery textures of the wine. Now, if that ever happened to white wines in the old world, so anywhere in Europe, especially in France, then it's going to happen in smaller amounts. So maybe only 20% malolactic fermentation, because it's just going to happen naturally if it's left there at a certain temperature. It may happen some years, it may not happen some years. It's just going to happen when it happens, very much left up to the will of the wine. But in California, they purposefully allowed that to happen because the wine didn't taste good, remember? So we're just trying to cover up with any way we can to make the wine a little bit more palatable. So they allowed the wine to go full malolactic and aged it in a lot of new American oak, getting these really intense oaky, buttery flavors in wine. Fast forward, several, 50 years to like post-prohibition. Now we understand where to plant California Chardonnay in the cooler sites, Russian River Valley, Mendocino, not heart of Napa. And we're able to practice better vineyard management so that we can make better quality wine. But the style kind of stuck. It's like the same story with IPAs or India Pale Ales. It's kind of like this accidental thing that they made to preserve the wine because there's no refrigeration for the English beers in India, to add a bunch of those hops, and it was kind of to cover up the faults of unpreserved beers. But then we developed a flavor and a style for it, and now there's like people are like, no, I still want that oaky buttery style. So then throughout the 60s and 70s, they still used more new oak and malolactic fermentation than anywhere else in the world had ever really done before. And then it even skyrocketed past that in the 80s when Robert Parker really loved those rich, oaky, buttery styles of Chardonnay. So now again, like we talked about, the style of kind of going back to the classic style of California wine. That's what LIOCO is doing. So he is using oak on these wines, but a little bit more older oak. And here we go. And on that note, I'm going to let Matt tell you the rest of the wine story. Matt, can you hear us? Says he's connecting. Hi, Matt, how are you? Think you're on mute. If you could unmute. Ooh, we might have missed him. Okay. Well, while he gets reconnected, this is just the story of the week. Let's see here. Thanks for being patient, y'all.
Can you hear me?
Yes, hello.
I'm so sorry. I'm having some real technical difficulties. I had to step out of my office just to get an internet signal. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yeah. Thank you so much. I'm sorry for all the technology troubles. It is the perfect marker for the year anniversary. Though. It's just how our lives are.
Exactly. I'm so sorry to keep you all waiting.
No, not at all.
Let's do this. You can jump me right in the gang.
Fabulous. I was just talking about just kind of the history of California winemaking in relation to Chardonnay, how it kind of started, its evolution in taste, and how you were kind of going back to more classic styles of winemaking, more European styles, but demonstrating the fruit of California. So we were just talking about history, but I was just about to jump into how you made this Chardonnay. So I will let you take it away. Thank you so much, first of all, for joining us. I can see in the vineyards, it's so beautiful out there. I really appreciate you taking the time for this.
Pleasure. My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And again, sorry to keep everyone waiting. Nobody likes to wait to drink wine on a Saturday.
I don't think we're waiting.
No offense taken. So the wine, we're talking about the 2018 Estero Chardonnay, right?
Yes, that is correct.
So we always call this our home court wine because it comes from vineyards that are just, you know, a 5-minute drive from the winery and where we live, also in the Russian River Valley. The reason I think it's quite distinct in the world of Russian River Valley Chardonnay is the style of the wine. You know, a lot of the decisions we made early on as a winery that we were going to point out wine involving a foil for food. So that would require acidic structure, which I think a lot of California wines, certainly back when we started 15 years ago, were missing. So I think the first thing people see or notice when they put their nose to the glass and put the wine in their mouth and it's LIOCO is that there's a lot of freshness and vitality and life in the wine. And that's not because we're dazzling winemakers. It's because we are sourcing fruit from vineyards that have a capacity to deliver that profile. And where the rubber really hits the road is we have the courage to go out and pick grapes 7 to 10 days earlier than most people would in the appellation. And the earlier you harvest your fruit, of course, the more acidic structure you have in the wine. And I think the fruit flavors tend to lead more in Chardonnay anyways, more toward the citrus fruit domain and away from the sort of fruit cocktail tropical profile that that California was doing for so long. I think kind of got off track with, in my opinion. So yeah, this is a Russian River Valley Chardonnay. It comes from a biodynamic farm about 11 miles from the ocean. It is in the lowest elevation vineyard area of the entire Russian River Basin. Why is that important? Because what does cold air do? It looks for a low place to settle out. They call this a cold sink, but it's where all the cold ocean-borne fog settles out, is in this area. And so it can be 5 or 8 degrees colder in this vineyard than it is just, you know, a pitching wedge outside of this zone. And the reason we like that is because the colder areas lead to longer ripening path of the fruit and higher acidic structure in the wine. So acid is everything in California. Very easy to achieve fruity, unctuous, delicious flavors in wine here with our abundant sunshine, right? I mean, it's the Garden of Eden here, right? I'm sitting in the Healdsburg Air, but I really should show you what I'm looking at. You know, a redwood tree that's probably 300 feet tall, 200 feet tall, and maybe 400 years old. So, you know, it is and everything grows wild and abundantly. For us to make wines that are balanced, we actually want to club some of that fruit bone, kind of rein it in and try and make wines that are pulled a little bit more taut and tense. And I think this Chardonnay, this Russian River Valley Chardonnay has that profile. It is taut, it is tense. It's still delicious and round out. It's from California. Style of Chardonnay, you know, I think we haven't seen, you know, since the 70s or the 80s, maybe. We kind of got away from that here in the 90s and early aughts. So yeah, we love it's a style of white wine that my wife and I drink. Mineral driven, citrus inflected white wine. Could be Sancerre, it could be Chablis, it could be LIOCO Russian River Chardonnay, it could be Vermentino. But they're wines that provide a lot of kind of thirst quenching refreshment and do great things with food.
Awesome. Since and everyone's got their Chardonnay in the glass, I'll make sure the chat room is open if y'all want to tell us your tasting notes and what you're smelling and tasting in the Chardonnay and how this resonates with you comparative to your other styles of Chardonnay that you've tasted before. But can you give us just an introduction to who you are and your history at LIOCO and your mission, what you're doing there in California?
Yes. Yep, absolutely. So my name is Matt Licklider. Hello. I co-founded LIOCO 15 years ago with a sommelier named Kevin O'Connor. So LIOCO is a blend of our surnames. Licklider, O'Connor, smashed together becomes LIOCO. And I found my way to wine while ski bumming in Aspen, Colorado. I was working in a fine dining restaurant at night, and we had a master sommelier named Damon Ornowski, who was working the floor at that restaurant. And he used to bring in all the servers once a week, open a bottle of wine from this great wine list that we had, and preach the gospel. And I went from a 22-year-old ski bum who was annoyed by the prospect of having to come in early to my shift to taste wine to having an aha moment. And actually the wine was a 93 Chambolle Musigny from Domaine Dujac, Pinot Noir from Burgundy. And I'll never forget the experience I had smelling and tasting that wine. But that really changed it for me. I thought, wow, this is different. And it set me on my journey. For the first 10 or so years of my career, I worked for wine importers. So my whole career prior to LIOCO was involved in French and Italian wine, and which I think tells you something about maybe how we arrived at our style. My partner being kind of a New York sommelier, had very much of an old world palate, and I was an importer, so I definitely had an old world palate. So here we were, two California kids living in California, and trying to make some kind of French style wines here in the soils. And that was 15 years ago. I founded the winery in my little 2-bedroom rent-controlled apartment in San Francisco. And we ran the business out of that apartment for 10 years. We didn't own then, nor do we own today, any vineyards. So our whole business requires us purchasing fruit from other estates. So what we do is and we follow up leads, and we have positions of California's greatest terroirs. That's what we do. And I'm speaking in the we form now. I should update you in that my wife, Sarah Licklider, joined the team about 6-7 years ago, and we bought out my founding partner, Kevin O'Connor. He went back to the restaurant world, opened his own restaurant actually in Los Angeles. So now it's a family business. My wife, Sarah, is the general manager. I'm the chief storyteller. And we have some very talented role players that help us bring all of it to life. But what I think is kind of fun is we just celebrated our 15-year anniversary, and we sat down over lunch and we were talking about, what had changed in the last 15 years for us. And it was remarkable actually how little the vision had changed. I mean, some of the words we had written in that business plan in June of 2005 were still very much the same words guiding us today, 15 years later. So I'm pretty proud about that. I think we had a hunch about the direction California wine needed to go. And we were pioneers back then. I can tell you, it was the first few years, aside from a few sommeliers in New York and San Francisco, most people didn't really know what to make of our wines. But now they seem kind of like right at home, right? In this what I would call a very pluralistic offering from California. There's still the big ripe oaky cocktail wines, and there's the wacky unfiltered orange natural wines. and there's everything in between. And I think LIOCO kind of falls somewhere in the middle there. I think we make very classic style wines. So that's a little bit about what we do. Any other kind of more generalized questions I might tee off on?
Yeah, so
or specific ones?
A lot of people couldn't tune in live tonight, so they bought the wines and they're going to watch the recording later. And I asked them if they wanted to ask any questions, email me them in advance. And resoundingly, I got this question that actually just popped up in the chat room as well here. We talk a lot about single vineyard wines and estate fruit and all that stuff. And can you talk to us about how important it is to source the right vineyard? How do you pick those? Is it trial and error? Have you ever worked with the vineyard and then after the first vintage, you're like, I'm not really liking the fruit coming from here, so I'm going to work with a different vineyard? Can you walk us through that process? Because it's different than a lot of the other processes that we've talked about in wines.
Yeah, great question. So what we like to do is we like to walk before we run. So we'll never put a vineyard into a long-term contract until we've made wine from it for 1 year. Not only do we want to check out the fruit, but we kind of want to check out the grower and see if we have a workable chemistry with the grower, right? Because every grower is different. Every grower has different agendas. So we just want to make sure we all like each other and can work together toward achieving the same goals. But when we look at a new vineyard, we do have kind of a qualitative checklist in our head. And it's funny, a lot of these things we learned from our experience with European wine, like how old are the vines? What kind of soil does it grow on? What's the diurnal shift in the vineyard? How close is it to the ocean? What sort of pressures are in the vineyard? Does the grower live on the property or do they just come up on the weekends and visit? Sort of horticultural practices are being employed. Do they talk about soil health? What sort of clones did they have in the ground and where did they get the budwood? All these kinds of things we want to know the answers to. Another very important data point is we would love ideally to taste some wine that's been made from that vineyard. That'll give you a lot of information, right? And then, there's also this other thing that you can't really quantify, which is your gut feeling about a place and a person. And you listen to that too. So I think we can look at a vineyard and have a conversation with the grower and glean a lot from that experience. And I think one thing I'm really proud of is that LIOCO has not only made wine from very well-established estates like Hansel and Hirsch and Kaiser and places like that, but also did our part in establishing new places that were totally off the map, like in the Santa Cruz Mountains or in the Redwood Valley, or this year we bought some fruit down in Los Mos, sandwiched between the Santa Maria Valley and Santa Barbara. So there's part of the spirit, I think, of our brand is a restlessness in always wanting to go out and look for the next exciting vineyard frontier, So we have our standards that we do year in and year out. And in fact, the Estero Chardonnay is one of them. But what you will also see from LIOCO, to our tasting full pictures, is that every year there are different wines in the mix. And that's because we're terrible at saying no to great vineyard opportunities. As my wife likes to remind me, you need to say no more. And we do actually say no, but if something really crosses our path and maybe we didn't need another Chardonnay vineyard, but boy, is this interesting, guilty of, giving it a go.
Excellent.
Kid in a candy shop, I think, is an apt.
I love that. I had one person in California describe it to me this way, and they said, if I had 5 generations in my family tending a vineyard, and they know, because based on that one bird's call, what's happening in the surrounding areas, then I would make wine from my own estate vineyards. I'm first generation. I don't understand the land as much as these people do, who literally for generations have been tending the same exact land. So their intimacy and their knowledge of that soil and that land is going to make them tend those vines much better. So kind of everyone kind of outsourced to do what they do best, and it all comes together really beautifully. So
exactly.
I love it.
Absolutely. And I think we can fast forward that experiment a little bit by, working the same vineyard over 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, right? Some of the best wines we've ever made have been from vineyards where we've had 6 or 7 tries at it, right? And every year you do glean some information about when things are ready and when to prune and when to pick and all that kind of thing, So that's not something you can really advance the ball. You can't accelerate the experiment. You just have to be patient and kind of integrate yourself into this natural cycle, which is once per year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's you don't get to practice regularly, so throughout the year. So, well, so that we don't take up your whole evening, and I want to talk about the reds and taste through the reds too. The next red we have is just the Mendocino Pinot Noir. So can you talk to us about the difference of that versus your single vineyard Pinot Noirs, the difference of characteristics, how you approach making just a basic Mendocino versus the single vineyard wines?
Yeah, so if I may borrow a Burgundian trope, because our label was so influenced by the wines of Burgundy, France, Chardonnay and Pinot Noir. The Mendocino Pinot Noir from LIOCO is analogous to the Bourgogne Rouge of Burgundy, whereas our LIOCO single vineyard Pinot Noirs would be analogous to the Premier or Grand Cru vineyards from Burgundy, right? And another way of looking at it, it's just like the aperture on a lens closing down. The more specific you get about the plant, a big geographical area that, despite its size, shares some common traits. There's some structural traits. There's an aromatic profile that is germane to Mendocino County that you don't get in Sonoma County Pinot Noir. Those are the concepts we're trying to work out with that wine. So even though it's a $28 bottle of wine, there's actually a lot of expertise and
See, we lost you for a little bit, Matt, there.
Hey, sorry about that. You hear me?
Yeah, good.
Okay. Sorry, I was just saying there's a lot of mind share and experience in the backstory of that Mendocino Pinot Noir, despite the fact that it's a blend of grapes from many different vineyards. Can you hear me? I think I'm having my earbuds are going dead on me. So it just seems to be like one thing after the next today. I apologize. Can you still hear me okay?
You're good, yeah.
Okay. Despite the fact that it's our least expensive wine, there's a lot that goes into it. That wine is a blend of many different vineyard sources. All of our Anderson Valley single vineyard Pinot Noirs send a barrel into that wine. In the same way that in Maurice Saint-Denis, Jeremy Cess from Dujac is declassifying barrels of really nice village level Burgundies into his Bourgogne, right? This Mendocino Pinot Noir is LIOCO's Bourgogne. So it's the recipient of a lot of stuff that doesn't make it into the higher end wines. So it's a blend of the Anderson Valley holdings plus some fruit that we buy in the nearby Potter Valley, which is an organically, the whole valley is farmed organically. And it's another cold interior zone that fills up with fog. It's another cold sink. And the fruit is much less expensive there, which allows us to get the wine to bottle and to market for, roughly $28 a bottle. So it's a blend. It's a real blend. It's a real county-wide snapshot of Mendocino County.
Awesome. So a couple questions that people were asking. Can you talk to us about the vineyards that are coming out of Mendocino? So we moved from Russian River Valley down to Mendocino. What's the soil type like there? You talked about it still being a cold sink, a lot of that fog influence. What's different about the soil that's happening in Mendocino?
So Anderson Valley is rather monochromatic in soil type. It's all decomposed sandstone and shale. The whole Anderson Valley is that way. And then in the Potter Valley, you have a lot more clay and rock in the soil. So from the lighter soils, the sand base that are more and, kind of linear and purple flower and black raspberry floral, very savory, prettiness in the wine. Whereas more grown clay-based soils, which are soils that retain water as opposed to draining water, like sandy soils will. The soil in the Potter Valley, you get broader shouldered, more like red fruit character, rhubarb, cherry, stuff like that. And so what we found is when you layer those two slides together on top of one another, and you get purple flowers and black raspberries and rhubarb and red cherries working together, you get a pretty delicious beverage, and that's the name of the game when you're blending. It's like making a stew, and you're layering in flavor, with your aromatics and then your herbs and then your garlic and a splash of wine. And don't tell anybody, a little fish sauce is my secret sauce, my secret ingredient, my stew. So it's kind of like that when you're making a big blended wine, like that Mendocino Pinot Noir is. I'm very proud of that wine. That wine is being poured by some of the best restaurants in the country right now. Charlie Bird in Manhattan, the Standard Hotel in Manhattan, Rich Table and State Bird Provisions in San Francisco, all pouring that wine by the glass. Lots of Michelin stars and pedigree on that roster. So I'm proud of it. I think it's not just a quaffer. It actually is a wine that has some personality, and I think a testament to that is the client list in the restaurant world.
Well, don't tell them it's that good, because half the people didn't get Pinot Noir in their packages for some reasons. And so just, it's the one wine that it doesn't matter that anybody tasted tonight, but it's really amazing. And as soon as I get it back in stock, I'll make sure everybody gets a bottle of it. So awesome.
We'll make more.
Awesome. Good. Glad to hear it. Can you talk to us about the oak you
Hang on a second. He's finally died on me, so I'm now going to audio, analog. Pretty soon, I'm just going to keel over and die.
My day was going the same way. So I think it's something in the, it's a full moon or Mercury is in retrograde or something. So who knows? Can you talk to us about the oak treatment? So for these wines, obviously oak is not the purpose of the wine. To taste oak is not what you're going for. You're trying to use oak to help express the fruit. So how do you choose the oak? How do you choose how much new oak, the toast of the barrels? What is kind of your philosophy going into that? That was some questions people had emailed to me.
Yeah, oak. Here's what I'm going to say about oak. Good or bad in and of itself. Oak is like salt on food, right? The right amount of salt on food just makes your food taste better. Too much salt on your food, all you taste is the salt. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah. So we think of oak in the cellar the same way. I want to use as little oak as possible, as little new oak. The whites don't have any new oak at all. Zero new oak on the whites. The reds have about 15 to 20%, depending on the cuvee. But for me, I'm not that interested in oak. I'm interested only insofar as the oak provides a framework for the terroir, right? I want to know what the place smells like, and I want to know what the vintage is having to say. And a lot of times, especially in California, oak gets in the way of that. So I'm actually really sensitive to oak. We're a no oak house, really. And I tell people that when they walk into our tasting room, if you like oaky wines, you're probably in the wrong place. So yeah, we don't want to taste the container or really even know too much. We want it to be in the background, like a well-seasoned piece of meat. The salt is in the background.
Awesome. I think you do it beautifully and always have. Every vintage shows that. So I've been featuring your wines in the restaurants I worked in before. I guess now for close to 6 years. So it's been really fun to see like vintage variation, but always a consistency of that purity of fruit and that.
Thank you.
It's been great. So
thank you.
Um,
Well, vintage variation is like so important. We don't talk about that enough, you know. Can I just say one more thing while I'm on my soapbox?
Of course.
So I feel like in American wine appreciation, we talk way too much about vintage, you know, chasing the quote unquote great vintages. And that's not our fault. That's, you know, the critics, the critics who had real gravitas back in the 90s and early aughts, who will remain nameless for this call, they were training us as new wine drinkers that the only wines worth drinking were the 95 point and above wines, all of which were of the same ilk: big, ripe, oaky, extracted, alcohol. You know, to me, all the things I don't want in wine. So what I would like to see, where I'd like to see us go in American wine appreciation, is let's just take an interest in every vintage. Let's have a curiosity about the vintage, because that is what makes wine so unique in the world of beverage, is that every year it's different, right? You know, a Modelo Pilsner tastes the same every time I buy it from my little Mexican market on the corner, right? A vodka and tonic tastes the same every time I order it. Wine is different every single year. It's an agricultural product, and we should be celebrating that. And we should develop a curiosity about it. I want to know what every year, what is the information that year is trying to transmit in the wine. That's what gets me excited about wine. So to me, the idea of a great, like only being interested in great vintages is completely bass-backward.
I love this. Before you got on, we talked about this, expressing vintage variation and not just making formulaic wine. So
yeah,
thank you. I get it. We're preaching it over here in Virginia, and
I love it.
There are people who also believe that. So that's awesome. Before we go on to the Canyon, a couple people have asked about technology. How has the development of technology changed the way you make wine? And are there like new technologies that you're using that you weren't using before that have been helpful? So whether that's in the vineyards or in the winemaking technique.
Interesting question. I think very salient to American wine in particular. We actually are an anti-technology house. So the way we're making wine is the way Neolithic farmers made wine, which is to say without technology. We are not the norm. Most of the commercially sized wineries that make hundreds of thousands or more cases of wine and have significant capital tied up in that product are using all kinds of technology to safeguard their product. LIOCO kind of just lets it rip, you know. So, and I'm not saying that's a better path, I'm saying that's a personal one, and it probably has a lot to do with the scale of your operation enterprise. But I will tell you this, in my opinion, the more we lean into technology, less you end up with. I think technology is soul wine. You know, we get a little too reliant on technology, a little too technically precise in our approach. You lose something. You know, it's like, do you want to listen to, you know, what's his name? I prefer, you know, John Coltrane, like the sound that comes out of Coltrane's horn, which is all over the board and the farthest thing away from perfect jazz notes. You know, he's making these in between notes and compressed notes. I prefer those sounds to, you know, Kenny G. You know, where every note is just perfect. You know, both things, but they have a very different style, right? And so it's not a right or wrong, good or bad thing. It's just preference. I like Coltrane. You know, I like Led Zeppelin. I like the crunchy raw edgy stuff, and I want that in my food, and I want it in my wine, and I want it in my music, and that's just the path that we go. So technology, no, not for us. Not to say we'll never use anything. I mean, if we have a disaster in the vineyard, actually this last year was a great example. There were fires and there was a lot of concern about smoke taint, and we used the lab to test grape samples from every one of our vineyard sources. So maybe I'm putting my foot back in my mouth. We did use technology when it served us in that regard, but we really never, as a general rule, it's sort of like we're never using it prophylactically. We're using it to save the patient that's on the ER table only.
No, I think that's a perfect answer to the question. So like you can use technology to make wine and make that formulaic wine, or you can use technology to give you better information about what that wine could be and just use that information. So
Exactly. Great distinction.
That's perfect.
Great distinction. Use it to mine information, and then you can decide what to do with that information.
Like
well said.
Steve Mathiasen is like the most data-driven person that I've ever met in my entire life, that has a spreadsheet of every vine on every one of his vineyards, and he tracks each key, like real intense. But he also says he doesn't want to, after that data and after he's making the wine, he doesn't really go into that information anymore because it loses the romance of wine. So he wants to get all the information, but he's not using technology to make the wine. So really fascinating differences there. So
exactly.
So we're gonna.
Steve, I have had many long nights of. Yep. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, not at all. He's really great. I got to meet him up in DC, and a 3-hour lecture literally changed my life. I learned more about how wine is actually made and what happens in the vineyards in those 3 hours that I had in 6 years of studying. So really, really smart guy. So we're gonna try the two Carignans.
He's a wealth of knowledge.
Yeah.
Incredible wealth of knowledge.
Absolutely. So speaking of vintages now,
Carignan, yes.
2019, the Indica Red, and we've got the 2017 Sativa Carignan. So can you walk us through, some people might be tasting these wines side by side, so it'd be fun to kind of talk about them as unique, but also in comparison to each other, the different vintages, how each wine was made, what are the big distinctions between the two?
The Sativa is 100% Carignan, fermented on whole clusters from a single vineyard. That's our top expression of Carignan. And that to me is Carignan at its apex. It's a vineyard unlike any other. It's at 2,400 feet off the valley floor. It was planted in the early 60s. A rock quarry, so the vines are rooting down in very tough rocky soils. And from the 100% whole clusters. The Indica is a blend from three different ranches, and it is 93% Carignan, 7% Valdiguet. Both they were kind of both used it's a beast. It's very personal.
Matt, I think we're losing you for a bit. The screen is frozen and you broke up. We couldn't really understand the last few things that you said.
Sorry, you hear me okay?
Yeah, I think we're better now. Yeah, and video's back. We're good.
Great. So yeah, the Indica is more of when you're cruising in Lower Manhattan in the West Village, and you wander into this little hip joint, Joseph Leonard, and sit down, and they're sending you out these amazing little plates from the kitchen. You order a glass of red that you want, that's just going to pair with everything. It's that kind of red wine. It's a red table wine that it kind of is in the same family of red wines as things like Barbera, Dolcetto, Corbière, Minervois, Blauers Weigelt, Cru Beaujolais. it's a medium weight red table wine. And
Well, I think we lost you again a little bit, but if y'all were there for the Piedmont wine class, I would totally agree that this is like similar to that Dolcetto that we tried there. So, and I could definitely see drinking this on a regular basis. This is like really good everyday wine. See, he's coming back online here. In the meantime, while he's tuning in, any other questions, keep popping them in the chat room. I promise I'll get to them as the conversation allows.
technology, the whole town of Healdsburg, I think, is having connectivity problems. My wife is in the Eastern Tasting Room since 1800, so I've gone to dial-up instead of Wi-Fi. Anyways, I apologize.
We're good.
Hear me okay?
Yes, I think we're good now. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay there?
Yeah, I think we're good. There's a little bit of a delay, so
yeah, I think the difference is one of the Carignans is a red table wine that's perfect for quaffing. That's the indica, and the sativa is a little more serious. The sativa is that's a wine I would prepare a meal for. It's from older vines. It's been fermented on all the whole bunches. It's got the structure from that tough rocky soil and those extremely cold nights up there on the top of Pine Mountain. It's a more severe wine. And I love that wine with short ribs, or actually anything out of a slow cooker is a great pairing with that wine. Anything that's like rendered a bunch of fat, pork shoulder or lamb shanks or something like that. But yeah, they're both, I would call truly California wines. They feature this heirloom grape that almost went extinct here and not many people know about. And LIOCO was in on Carignan from the second year we were making wine together. 2006, we started making Carignan, and we're still as excited about it today as ever. We make 3 wines from Carignan. So the 2 that you have, and also we make a bone dry rosé from 80-year-old vine Carignan, also in Mendocino County, that you should try and get. Try and get some of that. It's delicious.
yes, we're waiting for a shipment, and that will definitely be in my rosé 6-packs that are coming out. So that'll be great. Can you talk to us about Carignan, why you love it, what's up with these heritage vines, and how old are these vines, and what difference old vines makes for the quality of the wine?
Yeah, so the vines we use range from 60 to 80 years old. They're all dry farmed, head trained, California sprawl. Old vines, a general statement about old vines, and then I'll talk specifically about Carignan old vines. But old vines in general, they produce lower grape yields, which concentrates the flavors of the wine. I also think that when the vines get really old, you start to get a more soil-driven expression in the wine rather than a varietal expression, or a clonal expression. I think people love to talk about clones with Pinot Noir, and when the vines are young, it does really make a difference. Young ones all taste, smell a little different, but when those vines age out, it doesn't matter anymore. The old vines, I think, are delivering more of an expression of what's below the soil than above the soil. The same is true for Carignan, except I will say that young vine Carignan is pretty nasty. It doesn't make very interesting wine. It makes rather insipid wine. In fact, all of the Gallo Hardy Burgundy that our parents probably grew up drinking or drank as young adults in the big jugs, the Carlo and Rossi Gallo Hardy Burgundy, that was young vine Carignan from Central California farmed at, enormous grape yields and making these, rather,
maybe some of the
but yeah,
seeds that are going into your wine.
yeah, exactly.
So can you talk to, so this vintage, the sativa that we have now, first of all, I'm curious about the labels of indica and sativa. And second of all, we got the 2017 sativa right now. So is this someone had asked, do you make the same wine every vintage, or there's some wines you make certain vintage and skip? So some of your single vineyard wines, do you make a vintage, a wine every vintage, or do you make more blended wine?
We try and make, no, good question. We try and make all the wines every vintage. Yes. So occasionally there'll be some kind of natural circumstances that preclude that, but in general, our aspiration as vintners, is to make the same wines from the same vineyards every year. 17 was a very hot year here in California. And 19 was a cooler year on balance. 17 was really tough. We had like 3 record heat events during harvest in 17. But for Carignan, those old Carignan vines with the big head train canopies, they're like, who cares? Don't really matter. It was a much more difficult proposition for Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in 2017. But back to our conversation earlier, I love difficult vintages. I think that's when you really get to see the artistry of winemaking, because on the vintages where Mother Nature just falls over backwards with her legs in the air, everybody makes great wine that year, big deal. What do you do in a vintage like 2017 when you're picking in the middle of a heat storm, and all the fruit is potentially damaged by sunburn? Then what do you got, So especially this 2020, I think this is going to blow some people away. Everyone's expecting 2020 to be a wash here because of all the fires, and some of the whites and rosés that we've just put in the bottle are ravishing, high acid, low pH, flavor dense wines.
And that probably goes back to, picking 7 days earlier. So you're at lower bricks when you're harvesting. And so you're maintaining some of that acidity. Can you walk us through some of those terms for people who've never heard the terms bricks, or total acidity, or pH balance, in terms of what do you do? How do you analyze that before you decide how and when to pick the grapes? And
trying to think how to have this conversation without it being very pedantic, but they're just numbers, they're numbers and they're data, and we use the data, right? We look at the pH and we look at the tartratable acidity and we look at the bricks. But I will say this, again, back to the John Coltrane method, the thing we trust the most is not the numbers from the lab, it's our palates. So we'll never call a pick without tasting the flavors we want, because the numbers never tell you information about flavor. So we actually, we rely on our palates and what we're tasting in the vineyard to make decisions, much more so than we do pH, bricks, tartratable acidity, potassium load, all that data, and we do look at it. But I think, I don't know, maybe that we're just now 15 years, we have 15 years of experience of tasting grapes and having kind of a hunch that like, it's time to go. I don't have to look at what the bricks is to know that it's time. Like the flavors are right where we want them, that there's a balance of acidic structure and ripeness in the phenolic flavors of the fruit that's telling me it's go time.
That's awesome. I've got to ask though.
All right, we have some real ruffians in town today on their motorcycles. Sorry for the background noise.
It's okay. So I have to ask, who taught you to develop that palate? And when you taste the grape and experience it this way, then it's ready to pick, because 2 years ago, I went to work harvest in Oregon, and I was tasting the grapes, and obviously they taste nothing like the wine, and it was a very different experience as a sommelier tasting the finished product to tasting the grapes to figure out whether or not they're ripe enough. So you're new to the business in terms of wine making. How did you learn how to do that? Who were your mentors?
I had the great pleasure of tasting a lot of cold, unfinished Burgundy in cellars in Burgundy when I worked for North Berkeley Imports. So we would go to Burgundy twice a year, and I got to taste wines at every stage, from grape to cold, unfinished wine in barrel to finished wine in the bottle. So that started that process. But I think, nothing will supplant the need to just trial and error. I've now had 15 attempts at it, and we're still learning. I mean, we have not figured out most of it, honestly. So we're just trying to figure out a little piece every year. You want to learn one more little piece of the puzzle you want to figure out, and then hopefully by your 28th or 29th or 30th vintage, you've really made some wines you're proud of, and that's probably all we'll get as vintners. You might get 30 tries as a vintner, and that's it. Think of it that way.
Wow, yeah, that's it's a existential way of looking at it for sure. So a couple other questions just to make sure I get
Kira, I have to apologize. My phone is telling me that it's about to die. I have 1% charge in my phone. I'm so sorry.
Not at all.
All of my technology is going kaput. Remember the anti-technology guy? I'm paying the piper on that one.
Maybe we can continue this conversation just one-on-one another time, and I'll post that video.
We should, or in this setting. I'm happy to press pause, and we can pick this up next week, and we'll tee off again.
We might have to come up with another date because I've got some other classes lined up. But once we come up with that other date, then we can absolutely make that.
Anytime. I'm so sorry I was late and that I'm cutting off early. I hope that I was able to drop a little knowledge on your peeps. Thank you all for buying the wines, trying the wines. Come visit us in Healdsburg anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Matt. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kara.
Bye.
Bye now.
All right, everybody. Well, that, typical life doesn't go as planned, but if there's anything that would match the theme of agriculture and farming is you can never plan for everything, and adjusting for everything as it comes along is the life of a farmer, and that is what winemakers are. They're ultimately just farmers, or at least the best winemakers are. So if you all want to, I'd love to actually chat about these wines. And if you want to stay on, if you've got to run, totally fine now that Matt's gone. But if you'd like to go off of mute, I'd love to actually get your opinions on these wines. Let's talk about them. We can also discuss other questions that you had that we didn't get to before Matt left. So anyone have any opinions? I see, hi, Elisa and Emerson. Great to see y'all.
Hello. Good seeing you.
How did you like the wines?
I love them. They were all different, very different. Like the Chardonnay was I thought it was buttery, and then I don't remember the other flavor.
Oaky. No oak. There's zero oak.
Well, there is oak on the wine. It's just not new oak, so it's not going to be like you're only tasting oak. It's just the oak is giving some context to the wine, and there is malolactic fermentation on it, so you do still get some of those buttery notes. It's just not the only thing you taste.
I feel like I taste a fruit which I cannot name, but it's like butter and fruit, and I'm not sure what it is.
Well, didn't we decide it was a lime leaf?
Yes, it's my favorite, lime leaf. Yes.
Yes. Awesome. Did you open up the reds as well?
We did. We're really enjoying our evening.
Okay. Fabulous. I apologize if you finish all the bottles tonight, how you'll feel tomorrow. So, but good tonight for sure. Anyone else want to jump on and give us your comments? I see you, Cam and Christine. How are you?
Good. How are you, Kira?
Fabulous. Great to see y'all. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Most definitely. I can definitely tell you that I am really glad that he doesn't use a lot of oak, which is why I think I really like these reds and the Chardonnays. It's definitely the reds are like, I've never had this. We've never had this grape before.
Mm-mm.
And the only thing that I could come up with was like smelling the fourth one. I can't remember. It's like really earthy, but the moment I smelled it, all I smelled, and this is going to sound really like Southern, but I could only smell like corn coming off of a still.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, yes.
Sorry.
I gotta ask my mom.
Excuse me.
She grew up on a farm that grows a lot of corn. Mom, if you're still tuned in, do you get that? Do you get that aromatic? What is this aromatic that we're talking about?
First of all, I have to ask Cameron, how do you know what corn coming off of a still smells like exactly?
Mom, I honestly don't know what you would be talking
This is
about.
still being recorded, I think, so.
Hi ATF.
I am not a Chardonnay fan, and I love this Chardonnay. Possibly because it did not have the butter. It didn't just coat your mouth.
Right.
It was crisp. It was fresh. It was, it invited you to have another swallow. In fact, we were eating it here tonight with crab cakes.
Oh,
And that's why we had our video off for so long, because we didn't want everybody to watch us eating these crab cakes and fried cornbread, the two together. And it was the perfect pairing.
it's so rude to tell us all that.
Did you say fried cornbread?
Yes, because I was raised on a farm, and fried cornbread is basically nothing but cornmeal and water, and you fry it in grease. You make patties of it.
That
In
sounds
fact,
awesome.
North Carolina calls it lace cornbread.
Okay.
Yum.
That sounds awesome. Cora and Jake, how did y'all like the wines? These are very different. I know y'all buy a little bit more like European wines, generally speaking, like French, Italian, and Spanish. So how did you like this reserve style California?
We liked it. I got a lot of the lime on the Chardonnay, which made it different. I thought it was good though. And the fourth red is very smooth. I think this one is my favorite.
Yes.
I guess a lot of people are agreeing with you on that one. That Carignan, yeah. I'm so curious. I didn't get an answer to the labels of indica and sativa. I really wanted him to answer that question, but who knows? So I'll probably do like a one-on-one Zoom with him and ask him a lot of the questions we didn't get to, and post that video on YouTube. So if you want to follow up, I'm so sorry everybody for just how it all went tonight. I appreciate you being so flexible and working with me. If there's anything that we've learned this last year, is that technology is our friend, but it's so painful when it doesn't work the way we expect it to. So thank y'all for being troopers. I really appreciate it. So Ada and Alan, how did y'all like the wines?
We both love number 4. No, I wasn't a fan of the Chardonnay, but we do have some crab in the freezer, some Dungeness, so we're gonna try that with it and see if it improves our taste buds for it.
Okay, awesome. Now y'all are generally a little bit more like crisper style of whites and a little bit more like floral style. So this is definitely a different style of white wine than you normally like.
Right, that's true. I won't argue that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the Carnet, we were looking online. We had that 7-8 years ago at a place that's only like 7 or 8 miles from him, and we've loved it ever since then. And so we were happy to taste that again, and we'll be ordering some of that, I think.
Nice. That's awesome. Did anyone have anything that what did anything he say like jump out at you? Oh, and I see your comment. So they paired the Chardonnay Chandler paired the Chardonnay with mac and cheese, fabulous. The Pinot Noir with chicken tikka masala, oh my gosh, sounds delicious. And the Carignan with barbacoa. I don't know that dish, but now I'm curious. All were great, fabulous job, great wines were great, wonderful. I'm so glad you enjoyed. I know you got like a little dinner party hanging out over there, so I'm glad you were able to tune in. Sorry again about the technology. Did anything he say stand out at you? Like, I've never heard that before. Was anything wildly different than you had heard before, either about history of California, winemaking styles, how the wines were made? I know it was difficult to understand some of what he was saying due to the noise and wind, but anything strike you?
I still don't know what a brick is.
Okay, yeah, great.
Yeah.
So I want him to like break this down for us a little bit, like break it down. But I could tell he didn't want to talk pedantically. So bricks is literally the measure of the sugar content of the individual grape whenever you measure it. So it goes to a scale. I think the scale goes to 50. It might go to 100. Someone might need to, don't quote me on that for sure. But generally you want to harvest, most people harvest around 25 to 35 bricks, depending on what kind of wines you're making. So if you wait longer to harvest your grapes, the bricks are going to be higher, because the higher the bricks are, the more sugar content is in the grape itself, which means that as the grapes are hanging on the vine itself is sending more and more sugar, glucose, to the actual grapes and developing that ripeness, hopefully so that the birds will eat it, think it's tasty, come back for more, and spread the seed all over the universe. So that's the point of the sugar content. Well, the sugar content matters for a couple reasons. For one, it's the food of yeast for the fermentation. So yeast eats the sugar molecules, and the byproduct is carbon dioxide and alcohol. And so the more food that the yeast has, the higher the alcohol content is going to be in your wine. So if you're picking bricks at 35, if you're picking your grapes at 35 bricks, that's a very high sugar content. So if you ferment your wine all the way dry, you're looking at really high alcohol content wine. We're talking like those are the California's Infidels at like 15.7% alcohol kind of stuff. If you're picking bricks at like 24, that's very, very low sugar content. So you're going to have acidic, bright, tart, low alcohol content wine. So it's going to affect the flavor of the wine. It's going to affect the alcohol content of the wine. But the reason it affects the flavor is not the sugar molecules themselves, because that's just food for the yeast. It's how long you wait for the grapes to ripen. So as they ripen, the sugar increases, the acidity decreases. And so you're going to have more fruit flavors of the wine, less of that bright acidity that gives the structure and a character to the wine. So he's saying he's picking his grapes 7 days earlier than most other people in California. That matters. Those last few days of harvest matter a huge deal. So in one day, the bricks could go from 23 to 25. Which is a big difference in terms of those flavor profiles in the wine. So each day matters. So if he's picking up that much earlier, that means instead of the ripe tropical fruits of Chardonnay that you can get like banana, papaya, baked apples, he's getting more of that lime, citrus, Granny Smith apples, that tart, more underripe fruit, because he's picking earlier. So that's what bricks is. It's the sugar content of the grapes. And people decide when to harvest based on usually that calculation. So any other questions? I hope that made sense.
Yeah, it does. But so are most people, when are they testing for that, or they're doing it by taste?
Yep, absolutely. So it's both. So they'll go through the vineyards and they'll pick, generally speaking, here's how it's done. They go through each vineyard and they'll like just pick a selection of grape clusters to kind of get an overall feel of where the vineyard's at. They'll pull all of those grape clusters back. So you might have 100 grape clusters total, kind of mash that all up to get a juice, and you can kind of stick a test tube in, almost like you would do a pH, and you can figure out bricks right away. So you wouldn't ever test just one grape, because one grape is going to be wildly different from another grape, even on the same cluster. So you want an overall feel of where this vineyard is at, because this vineyard is going to be at a different place than the next vineyard, which is in the shade, which is different than the next vineyard, which gets sun all day. So they'll test for that, and you might test for that every day, waiting to figure out, like, when should we tell the harvest workers to go ahead and cut? They're also tasting. They're tasting individual grapes in the vineyards, and they're tasting that compound juice that they're making. It's all test tubes and fun stuff, and that those grapes are wildly sweet. So you think grapes that we get table grapes in the grocery store, they're different genus and species. It's not Vitis vinifera that we make wine from. And what we get on the grocery store has very low sugar content. So the bricks are very low. Wine grapes, very high bricks. You need that sugar for the fermentation, for the flavors. And so you taste this stuff, like, I don't eat a lot of sugar. And even tasting the grapes, I had to start spitting them because I was getting like sugar highs just from tasting a few grapes, because the sugar just hits your system. Obviously not alcohol, but you feel a little bit like, whoo, you just like, I just ate a whole bag of Skittles, is how much sugar kind of goes into your system, tasting some of these juice concoctions right out of the vineyards. So it's not super pleasant. It was not my favorite part. I'll never be a winemaker, but I'm glad there's people out there that do that. So what about any other questions from or follow-ups needed from his discussion? No? Keith, did you have anything?
No.
You don't have to unmute. He's on the other side of the table. Nah?
No.
No? Okay.
The way they do, I do know, like, the way they measure bricks though, because I had to do this for a lot of pastry work. Bricks it's roughly like 1 gram of sugar per 100 grams of solution. So if you have 2 grams of sugar in a solution, it's going to be 2 degrees bricks, whereas if you have 85 grams of sugar in a solution, it's 100 grams, you're going to have an 85 degree brick solution. And the way they test it is like, there's this little, it looks like a flashlight almost. It's called a refractometer. And you put a little bit of the solution on the slide and you look through it, and it gauges by the amount of light that refracts through it. Yeah, there's actual like equipment and ways of measuring these things. It's all pretty standard.
Cool.
I think you can get one on Amazon for like $20.
Awesome.
So would that be considered technology or not?
I know.
That is technology. Yeah.
Yeah, that's technology. I think that goes along with the technology he does like using in terms of gathering information. The technology that he was saying he definitely doesn't do or incorporate in winemaking. There's so much technology, especially in the California winemaking, and especially in Pinot Noir. So if you've ever had, like, I'm going to pick on a brand name just because this part of the recording won't go up on my YouTube channel. So Meiomi Pinot Noir, like really, really like one of the most like name brand, like one of the widest consumed California Pinot Noirs out there. I think probably the most outside of like your like jug Pinot Noir. And what they actually use, they use centrifugal force extraction to literally spin out extra water molecules of their Pinot Noir to further concentrate the wine. So if you do have that Pinot Noir, if you were the lucky ones to get that Pinot Noir, you can see it's paler in color. It's not mouth coating and rich and dense. It's lighter, it's more refreshing, it's delicate. You can read through it easily. That's because they did not spin out, they didn't use a centrifuge to spin out extra water molecules from that wine. So those are the kind of technological things that I could tell he was wanting to talk about, but you don't want to call out other winemakers online, you get in trouble for that. So that's the kind of technology that he's definitely very against. And I mean, all of the producers that I feature are pretty against that technology. I'm not saying that those wines are bad. Again, every wine I think has its time and a place, just like shoes. That's why I buy a lot of shoes. Everything has its time and a place, and I will never be mad at anyone for drinking any wine that they enjoy. Great. Just understand that some wines are made with more of that technology, more of those formulas than other wines that are trying to be more expressions of the grape in the vineyard of that vintage, like LIOCO is doing, if that makes any sense. So I'm not trying to make this sound snobby, like these are wines made like this, not like this. It's just different approaches to wine, making different styles. So yeah, that technology question I could tell could go a lot of different ways. So really interesting. Any other last follow-up questions or anything? I hope you all enjoyed this despite all of the technological challenges of this evening. Awesome. Well, stay tuned for the biodynamics class that will be with the expert. I'll still call it a Meet the Maker event because he is a winemaker. I'm just not technically the only winemaker for this one winery in the south of France, where Carignan and Valdiguier are grown prolifically. Generally speaking, Carignan is a grape that's grown a lot in the south of France, but it's always used in a blend. So it's really interesting. I wanted to hear a little bit more about the history of why that grape was planted in California originally, but we didn't get into that. I'll keep you posted if we post this video, if I get to chat with him again about this. So glad you all got to tune in. Thank you so much for participating. I hope you enjoy the wines for the rest of the evening with whatever food you've got, and we'll hopefully see you next time.
Thank you so much, Kira.
Okay, so
Thank you.
bye, y'all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kira.
Cheers.